The imperial guards discovered him shivering in the wine cellar of an abandoned villa, his fingers curled around a tiny vial filled with lethal poison. This wasn't some fugitive or political conspirator. This was Sporus, barely 20, once presented to the world as the Empress of Rome, now preparing to end his life rather than suffer the fate the new emperor intended for him in the arena. But to understand why death felt merciful compared to what awaited him, we need to go back 3 years, to the moment a grief-stricken, unraveling emperor first noticed a teenage boy who bore an uncanny resemblance to his recently dead wife. What follows isn't just another episode of Roman decadence, it is perhaps the most extreme case of identity reconstruction in history, in which a ruler didn't steal a man's name or fortune, but rewrote his body, memories, and existence to resurrect a woman long gone. And the most horrifying part? Roman chroniclers recorded every step. Rome, 65 AD. The most powerful man on earth had just committed a murder. Not on the battlefield, not through official execution, but in the private chambers of his palace. Emperor Nero had killed his pregnant wife, Poppaea Sabina, with his own hands. Some ancient writers described a single devastating kick to her swollen belly. Others recount a violent outburst that left her dying on the marble floor. Nero, realizing too late what he had done, screamed for physicians, but not even a man raised to believe he had divine blood could stop death. Poppaea was not an ordinary imperial spouse. She had been Nero's obsession, his muse, his mirror, the woman who fed his delusions of grandeur. Her beauty was legendary: amber hair that shimmered like spun gold, luminous pale skin, and her most famous feature, large soft eyes poets compared to those of Venus herself. But Nero's grief was not the ordinary despair of a grieving husband. When someone raised to think he is semi-divine encounters a boundary he cannot cross, death, it becomes a personal insult, a challenge, a taunt from the universe. His reaction shocked even Rome's jaded aristocrats. Instead of cremation, he had Poppaea's body preserved with enormous quantities of spices, more, one writer said, than the Arabian Peninsula produced in a year. Her corpse was dressed in her finest gowns and placed in a crystal-clear sarcophagus so he could look upon her whenever he wished. Servants whispered that Nero held conversations with the embalmed body. At banquets, he ordered her place set at the table as though she might dine with him. He preserved her chambers exactly as she left them, down to the placement of her hairpin and perfume bottles. Sleep became impossible without heavy doses of poppy-infused wine. Night after night, he woke screaming her name. Then, 2 months after her death, something changed. Nero began seeing Poppaea everywhere, in the face of a young maid, reflected in the features of a senator's wife, in prostitutes in the Subura. He would abruptly stop mid-conversation, staring at a woman who resembled her even faintly, sometimes grabbing the unfortunate by the chin and turning her toward the light. His obsession intensified. He ordered hundreds of portraits and statues, demanding artists capture not just her face, but her spirit. When they failed, he raged or wept or had them beaten. The palace lived in terrified silence, praying the emperor's madness would burn out. But it only deepened. One afternoon, while reviewing administrative appointments, a task he usually delegated, Nero looked up at a newly promoted young freedman brought forward for confirmation. The emperor froze. The boy, around 15, had Poppaea's eyes, not a resemblance, an exact replication. The same enormous dark lashes, the identical way the irises caught the lamplight, the delicate bone structure, even the nervous tilt of the head. Nero rose so abruptly that the scrolls fell from his lap. The court held its breath as he circled the terrified youth like a predator studying an unfamiliar animal. Yet his expression didn't show anger. It showed overwhelming hope, a wild joy more frightening than any rage. "What is your name?" Nero whispered. "Sporus, Divine Augustus." Sporus wasn't an ordinary servant. Born within the imperial household, educated in Greek and Latin, trained for clerical duties, he had been marked for a modest administrative life. But none of that mattered now. The moment Nero laid eyes on him, Sporus ceased to exist as an individual. He became raw material for the emperor's delusion. Nero inspected the boy for endless minutes, touching his face, turning it this way and that, studying his features with maniacal intensity. When he finally stepped back, he smiled, a smile chroniclers described as the expression of a man who believed he had outwitted death itself. "Cancel today's appointments," he commanded. "Summon my physicians. Tell them to prepare their instruments. There is work to be done." The transformation begins. The physical alterations didn't start immediately. First came the study. Sporus was placed in lavish quarters near Nero's own and examined like a living mannequin. Artists who had painted Poppaea were ordered to sketch him beside her portraits, noting similarities and flaws. Nero pored over their drawings, annotating them, planning corrections. Sporus's voice and posture were scrutinized. He was taught Poppaea's unique ways of speaking, the cadence of her laughter, the gestures she used when addressing senators or slaves. Servants were instructed to call her lady, mistress, or Sabina. Her tunics were replaced with feminine stolas in Poppaea's favorite hues. Cosmetics were applied daily. Imagine waking each morning, looking into a polished bronze mirror, and watching your own identity vanish piece by piece. Sporus rarely spoke. He moved like a sleepwalker, but he didn't resist. Resistance meant death, or worse. Because Nero explained his intentions openly. The emperor planned not merely to create a eunuch, but to reconstruct Sporus into a woman, an unprecedented procedure even in Rome. Under threat of death, physicians devised brutal surgeries to reshape the young body into a feminine form. The night before, Nero visited Sporus carrying a box. Inside lay Poppaea's emerald wedding ring. He slid it onto the boy's trembling hand. "Tomorrow you will be reborn. You will become who you were meant to be." "Will it hurt?" Sporus whispered. "Birth always hurts," Nero replied with chilling tenderness. The operation lasted hours. Searing screams were heard echoing through the palace wings. Nero paced outside like an expectant father, shouting encouragement as though his voice could soothe agony. Months of recovery followed. Infection always threatened. Sporus had to relearn how to live in a body reshaped for someone else's fantasy. Nero was constantly present, bringing gifts, reading Poppaea's favorite poetry, helping with bandages. His tenderness was twisted. It served only to reinforce Sporus's new role. Tutors trained him relentlessly, how to walk with feminine steps, how to hold a cup, how to recline at dinner, how to use Poppaea's vocabulary and mannerisms. Seamstresses recreated her gowns, jewelers resized her bracelets, perfumers replicated her scent. Nero didn't want a woman, he wanted Poppaea resurrected, and Sporus became that resurrection. The first public appearance. 6 months later, Sporus appeared at a small dinner attended by Rome's highest elites. He entered wearing one of Poppaea's signature purple gowns, her jewels sparkling, his face painted exactly as hers once had been. Conversation died instantly. Even seasoned politicians went pale. The illusion was uncanny, enough that in dim lamplight, the illusion felt real. Nero introduced him as his beloved Sabina, using Poppaea's family name. Guests played along because any refusal meant death. They complimented her beauty, pretended the dead empress had returned. But small cracks showed. Hands slightly too large, shoulders faintly masculine, the voice occasionally slipping. Now and then glimpses of Sporus's real mind surfaced, a flash of wit, a glimmer of sadness. Such moments were punished not with blows, but with cold withdrawal, Nero threatening to find another Poppaea if this one disappointed him. The wedding. Early in 67 AD, Nero announced he would marry Sporus in a full state wedding.
Invitations went out to senators and foreign dignitaries. Refusal was not an option. Sporus wore the saffron veil of a Roman bride. Rituals were performed. Formal contracts were drawn up. Nero carried his new wife over the threshold as the law required. At the feast, guests toasted the couple through fixed, terrified smiles. Poets recited verses celebrating their union. Some even offered fertility charms, either out of dark humor or desperate self-preservation. This was beyond decadence. It was a violation of nature, dignity, and reality itself. Life as empress. Sporus's daily existence became an endless performance. He awoke in Poppaea's chambers, surrounded by her belongings. Former attendants dressed him in her clothing, styled his hair, applied cosmetics, and rehearsed the character he had to maintain. In public, he sat in the imperial box at the games,
rode in Poppaea's gilded litter, and received honors meant for an Augusta. The Roman crowd gawked at him, half in fascination, half in disbelief. During Nero's tour of Greece, Sporus was treated with full ceremonial deference. Priests prayed for the couple's fertility. Banquets were held in his honor. He presided at rituals reserved only for the emperor's wife. In private, the psychological torment was worse. Nero expected Sporus to respond to affection as Poppaea had, down to specific jokes and gestures. Any deviation threatened the delicate illusion on which Sporus's survival depended. Servants found him wandering gardens at dawn, staring blankly, as if unsure who he was when not performing. Some reported hearing him speak to mirrors, one voice masculine, one feminine, the edges of his identity blurring under the strain. Nero's fall. By 68 AD, rebellion swept the empire. The Senate declared Nero an enemy of the state. The Praetorian Guard deserted him. As Nero fled Rome, Sporus accompanied him, the emperor's last desperate attachment to the illusion he'd created. Witnesses recall Nero clutching Sporus, begging him to die with him. When capture became inevitable, Nero chose suicide. He asked Sporus to perform ritual mourning as Poppaea would have done. When Nero hesitated with the dagger, Sporus helped guide it, a final act of mercy. After Nero. With Nero dead, Sporus did not regain freedom. Instead, he became a political trophy. Galba, the elderly general who took power, treated him politely, but kept him confined. Sporus continued living dressed as a woman, trapped in an identity he could no longer escape. Galba was soon murdered, and his successor, Otho, Poppaea's former husband, claimed Sporus next. Some sources suggest he even planned to marry him, perhaps out of grief or twisted nostalgia. But Otho's reign lasted only months. Then came Vitellius. Vitellius was crude, brutish, and eager to amuse the mob. He saw Sporus not as an empress or symbol, but as entertainment. The final horror. Vitellius planned a grotesque spectacle. Sporus would reenact the myth of Proserpina being dragged to the underworld. Gladiators dressed as demons would abduct him, assault him publicly, and kill him in the arena. When Sporus learned his fate, he made his final choice. Rather than endure one last humiliation, he took his own life, by poison or by opening his veins. Ancient sources don't agree on the method, but they agree on the outcome. He died around age 20. Legacy. Sporus's story forces us to confront chilling truths about power and identity. A human being was dismantled and rebuilt
to satisfy another's fantasy. Body, mind, personality, everything was violated. His true self disappeared so completely that even his birth name is uncertain. Sporus may itself have been a cruel nickname meaning seed, a reference to his mutilation. Some historians argue that his final suicide was his only real act of autonomy. Others point to small moments of resistance, his attempts to escape, his brief flashes of personality, his role in Nero's death. But perhaps the most disturbing element is how many people participated. Physicians, tutors, servants, senators, an entire society complicit in the emperor's delusion. Sporus's tragedy reminds us that when unchecked power warps reality itself, humanity becomes the first casualty.
Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be the first to know when new videos drop.